between 1998 and 2015. There's 21 trillion of undocumentable adjustments. We would do a systematic look at the underground bases and see if we could calculate how much was spent. During the litigation, I was poisoned 8 times. I had my house broken into. People tried to run me off the road. The digital control grid is an effort to use new technology to create complete 24/7 surveillance to provide carrots and sticks that literally control people and their behaviors around being outside the central banking system, but being able to stay outside because you have so many fossil fuel resources. And what you're watching is a big war about whose channel the Iranian resources are going to be flowing through. The laws and the systems are being put in place that make this possible. Literally, you're talking about an extraordinary kind of slavery that the world has never seen before. This is not far in the future.
World War III is already happening.
This is a house of cards, and it is in the process of collapsing right now.
You're going to see an economic crash, the likes of which we've never seen.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. It's an honor today to be joined by Catherine Austin Fitts, former Assistant Secretary of Housing and Federal Housing Commissioner under President George W. Bush, founder of the Solari Report and a longtime investment banker, an independent analyst of finance, government policy, and global power structures. She is widely known for her work on the emerging control grid, as well as warnings about hidden infrastructure, including underground bunker networks and how these systems may relate to power, continuity of government, and social control. And of course, as a prepper, wanted to get your opinion of this control grid, as you call it, that's being developed, and how that relates to the Middle East crisis that's unfolding, get your perspective on the Iran war. Thank you for coming out today. How are you doing?
Fine, and thank you for having me. It's great to be on, and it's, I find your channel to be very useful. Everything is so practical and useful, so I appreciate what you're doing.
It's kind of pivoted towards information because information now is a commodity, which is why we bring people like you on, because you obviously have a immense knowledge of the inner workings of the system. And so what is the control grid from your point of view?
So the digital control grid is an effort to use new technology, digital technology and telecommunications to create a system that can provide complete 24/7 surveillance, and then use that information and that intelligence to provide carrots and sticks that literally control people and their behavior, can control their spatial movements. So you remember during COVID, the lockdowns?
Oh, yeah.
So if you try and go more than 15 minutes from your home, or, it could be a distance, we can turn off your car, we can turn off your electricity, we can change your money, we can turn off your money. So, or your money won't work, outside a certain perimeter. So we're using electrical systems and financial systems and telecommunication systems to basically put you in an open air prison. It is essentially, some people call it the panopticon.
Panopticon,
and I think that's a good description. A panopticon is a design of a prison where, one tower can watch all the prisoners, but the prisoners can't tell what the tower is looking at that moment. So they have to assume they're being watched 24/7.
That's an element of the panopticon I forgot about, that there was a one-way mirror of sorts.
Yeah, it's a one-way mirror.
The all-seeing eye. And so you think that the key to this is programmable money, correct?
Yes.
Can you just explain what that is for people?
Right. So right now, you and I use digital money. Most of our money, whether we're using a credit card or a bank account, is digital. But a dollar is a dollar. Whether a Canadian dollar, US dollar, a dollar is a dollar. Programmable money embeds within the currency itself controls. So we watched the Canadian truckers debanked, but that was the bank instituting a policy. It wasn't embedding in the software, right, different algorithms literally within the currency so that it could manipulate you based on what AI and software were tracking you doing as a matter of surveillance. Programmable money allows very complex rule systems that can be tailored to you individually to be embedded in your money. And so rules as to what you can do and where you can go and how you can live can be literally embedded into an AI surveillance system, and work through your money to literally implement control of you and what you do and how you do. If you don't take the healthcare prescriptions we require of you, we can turn off your money. If you don't agree to let us take your children and move them into a government boarding school where, we determine what they, how they live and what they learn, we can turn off your money. So literally you're talking about an extraordinary kind of slavery that the world has never seen before because it is so completely invasive.
So help us operationalize what that might look like, because you said something interesting about geofencing. So with this programmable money, I would only be able to spend my credits or whatever they'll be called within a certain location, and there could be perhaps various tiers.
Yeah, so I move you to a 15-minute city, and you're not allowed to leave that 15-minute city either ever or, only it's on Sundays or only on Saturdays. In other words, I can dictate a set of what you can and cannot do spatially in terms of how far you can roam. And if your money won't work outside that, whatever that rule system is, your money won't work outside that system, or you can be punished and your money turned off completely if you try and move beyond the limits that have been set for you. And we can turn off your car. If you have an electric car, your car won't work outside that area, or we can turn it off or take it away.
Or just drive you to the police station.
Right, exactly.
So it seems like this is a recipe for a multi-tiered system to develop a loyalty caste where certain people will be able to use currencies in different zones, maybe.
Right, but it won't be a currency anymore. In other words, it's the end of currency, right? Because it's simply a rule system, and you can earn credits in the rule system, and the rule system can apply all sorts of carrots and sticks. So if you're very, very good, you could get more credits. If you're bad, you could have your credits taken away. So the big issue here, if you look at the world that we've grown up in, most of us have grown up, whether Canada, the United States, in a world where the bankers control monetary policy and the people's representatives control fiscal policy, which means the people's representatives set taxes and then determine how the money's going to be spent. Now the bankers in the system can control what taxes are. If they want to raise taxes, they just take it out of your account. You have no control. And there's no need to vote for representatives because the bankers can control it directly and they can decide how it's spent. And if you don't like that, they can turn off your money. Interesting.
And so how, this seems like something that's well into the future. Is there going to be a point when this becomes official? How do we get to there from where we are right now? What are they doing?
This is not far in the future. This is coming now. If you look at the debanking, you look at the control of credit cards, if you look at the new stablecoins putting terms and conditions that say you're not allowed to buy, you can't buy a bow and arrow with Circle until there was a whole hullabaloo and they had to change their terms and conditions. But this is here now, and most importantly, the laws and the systems are being put in place that make this possible. So now is the time. We have maybe at most 2 years to do the things we need to do to prevent this from clicking in and going live. So when they say it's 2030 and you have no assets, they're serious. They're creating a system where they can literally take all your assets, including your kids.
And so is there not going to be any universal currency that operates outside this system? Are we talking about gold? Are we talking about Bitcoin?
You don't, in other words, you don't need a universal currency to implement this. You need everything on a distributed ledger. So if you look at the United States, Larry Fink running BlackRock saying he's going to move all stocks and bonds, or all stocks and bonds are going to be moved onto a distributive ledger. It's the distributive ledger technology that gives you the control you need. So they've passed, in the United States, they passed the Genius Act, which creates a pipeline from Treasury into every issuer's stablecoins from which they can implement a detailed rule system if they choose. So that's stablecoins, the Clarity Act, which relates to digital tokens, which will be used to then move stocks and bonds and the rest of the financial market onto a distributed ledger, is still undergoing negotiations, and then the rules are going to have to be promulgated. So they're planning on having stablecoins ready to go by the end of the year. The proposed regulations are out, and then the final regulations they're hoping to get by November, which means that piece, which is essentially bank deposits and replacing bank deposits with stablecoins, is rolling out. And then the Clarity Act will follow, presumably, in the next year. But what they're saying is they're going to move the entire, over here you have several $100 trillion. And what they're saying is, okay, we're going to put that several $100 trillion over here on distributed ledgers, which essentially give them the ability to make everything in the financial system programmable. Both your payment, the money you have in payment systems currently in banks, or your stocks and bonds, and anything else becomes programmable and subject to, this is why they're building all the data centers, because to track and customize rule systems for this many people requires mammoth amounts of data collection and calculations and sort of the data you need for implementation.
Yeah, this seems like a natural evolution from what we have now. And I always look at the example of, people when they used to buy stocks, they used to have an actual stock certificate. But now you do it through like online banking, and you don't actually have the stock certificate. You're kind of confiding in the bank as a IOU of sorts that they're going to have it on your behalf. And so this is an extension of alienating you further from, I guess, the source of the transaction.
I don't understand, and I've tried to understand. I don't understand exactly how they're going to implement this. I listen to them describe what they say they're going to do, but it's very conceptual. So, for example, if I have a share of IBM stock in a BlackRock ETF, is the digital token I create going to be collateralized or legally connected to that stock, or is it going to be separate? Mm-hmm. I don't see operationally how the linkages are going to work. What I do know is they're planning on this new market of digital tokens being traded 24/7. And the first proposals are massive amount of margin and leverage. And so we could be talking about a whole new layer of financialization. There are a lot of people in the financial world who are saying, well, the bubble is over because it's got to come to an end.
Right.
And what we're talking about is creating a bubble machine much bigger than anything the world has ever seen.
A whole new layer of derivatives on top of the existing house of cards.
Well, but here's what's worse. Right now, so Canada is consolidated into a very small, large banking system, but the U.S. still has approximately 4,000 banks. And those banks create credit by making loans. And as long as they're well run, that's building growth without inflation. It's circulating money on Main Street. What stablecoins is proposing to do is suck all the money out of the local banks and move it into the treasury market where it finances the war machine, right? And so you're going to hear a giant sucking sound of money out of local economies all around the world if it works. And that's going to implode the small business and small farm economy.
And can you explain stablecoins to people in a very simple, dumbed down way so we can understand it?
A stablecoin is a piece of crypto. So $1 of stablecoin, it's a crypto. It's on a distributive ledger. And that dollar has been invested in a short-term treasury bill. Okay? So it's like using a little piece of a treasury bill as a currency. So imagine if I bought a treasury bill and I tore off a little piece and I used it to trade with. Mm-hmm. So I'm transacting using a tiny piece of treasury bill. And instead of putting my money in a bank and that bank circulating it in loans in the economy, I'm going to put it in the treasury market where it's going to finance more central control.
And so who do you think is, behind this? Who is the third rail or the fifth column here? Like, what is the driving force behind this? I mean, is it just Larry Fink and BlackRock, or is it some shadowy cabal? Like, who's responsible for this? Or is it just a natural evolution of our monetary system?
So I would say, the bankers in the current system, essentially went through a process where they took over the management of monetary policy. And we've had a process now in the United States where the bankers have said, look, it doesn't work. The balance of power of fiscal control by the people's representatives and monetary control by the bankers, that system doesn't work. You can't trust Congress and the people. They'll just vote for more money for themselves, et cetera. So that system doesn't work. And so now we're going to take over fiscal policy. And if you look at who's driving that, a couple of things are driving that. One is what I would describe as the kind of people whose capital owns the central banks and directs central bank policy. And so they work through the central bank bureaucracy, and those are the people who've been driving the train. So the Bank of International Settlements for the last 10, 15 years has been running a process that basically said, okay, how do we use digital technology to re-engineer how the transaction systems work? And they've been running that process for a long time. If you go to their website, they describe it, and that includes central bank digital currency. Now, there's been so much pushback against central bank digital currency that in the United States, what they decided to do, because the Fed doesn't have legal authorization to do a central bank digital currency, but also there's a lot of opposition to it. And so what they've decided to do is a public-private partnership where instead of the New York Fed issuing the central bank digital currency, the banks that own the New York Fed will issue stablecoins and digital tokens, and will get the advantages of not having public obligations that the central bank has. But still behind the scenes, if you look at who's piping in the rule system, in this construct, it's going to come through Treasury. But because the government is totally dependent on the bankers to keep the debt markets going, it's basically going to be controlled by the same people. And if you want to understand the system, I recommend a wonderful Substack to you. If you come to Solari, we have a commentary called Was Jeffrey Epstein the Father of Programmable Money? And the answer is yes. If you look at who has developed much of the development in the United States of the distributed ledger technology you need to do all of this, Epstein was a critical player in getting that prototyped and sort of getting the prototype phase happening and financed. And if you read our commentary, it points you to a Substack called the Escape Key Substack that basically describes how Epstein, working as an agent for the Rothschild network, which is part of the central bank equity pool, basically, got this whole technology seeded and financed and developed.
Contrary to popular belief, in the apocalypse, most people aren't going to die by the hands of marauders. In fact, you're probably going to die from disease. This is why you need antibiotics. The problem is, getting them requires a prescription. Well, today's sponsor is Jace Medical. They've created a revolutionary service that allows you to get prescription medications like antibiotics with relative ease, hassle-free. This will be worth more than gold in an emergency for somebody who needs them. So do yourself a favor and take your prepping to the next level while you still can. Check out the link in the description below. And now, back to the video. So is this system that's coming, would you say that it's inherently nefarious, or is it just that it could be weaponized, kind of like anything, I suppose? Like, is it that because it seems like in some ways a kind of natural evolution, but are you thinking that it's not the ideal monetary paradigm that we should be adopting into the future?
So I think the natural evolution would be a thousand flowers bloom.
And what do you mean by that?
Tight central control. What new technology should do is make the small guy more efficient, more productive, more effective.
Right.
And so you should have a lot of very high learning speed innovation, sort of bottom up. That's not what's happening. This is very tightly controlled. And if somebody is successful outside their lane, they get assassinated, their business gets destroyed. Those are all hallmarks of a central governance system that's not based on meritocracy.
So they see the evolution of technology moving towards decentralization and empowering the little guy, and they're trying to get ahead of it by creating these systems that will actually do the opposite and allow for more centralized control.
Right. So I would say they believe they can always improve and enhance central control by implementing this technology. So there's a wonderful book called The Master Switch by Tim Wu that I recommend to you about this. And he describes the history of information technology. A new technology comes out and everybody says, oh, this is fantastic. Entrepreneurs take it. They do all sorts of prototyping. And then all of a sudden, whoo, everything consolidates, and then the cycle starts again. But each time you go to more and more centralization. And what you start to realize is, oh, there's a hidden hand behind this because this has been going on for hundreds of years.
I mean, the emergence of AI is pretty scary in this respect, right? Because we're talking about supercharging all of these systems with this nebulous artificial general intelligence, which could afford them like nearly godlike powers of surveillance and the ability to increase their own understanding of things and keep that information esoteric. And I know you talk about data centers as a means of surveillance, but how does AI play into all of this?
So I don't think anybody knows. The question is, can they control it? And I don't know if they can, because the other possibility is it throws the whole system completely out of control.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And
yeah, they lose control of it.
They lose control of it. And here's the thing. At the root of this, I believe this is a spiritual warfare. Or a spiritual war. So you've got the demonic on one side and the divine on another side. And the question is, how many of us embrace the divine and how many embrace the demonic, and how will that affect the AI? Because ultimately, I believe it does. I believe that, that computer mechanics are not separate from, energy and plasma and how the universe works. The nature and nature's energy comes into everything and affects everything. So, I can't tell you what will happen because I think AI is out of the box and out of control. Now, there's been an inability to properly manage and regulate it, and so it's going to go out of control, and all bets are off about what could happen. I have no idea.
It seems self-evident to me that if there was something that was that powerful, they would very likely not allow the public to have access to it, but they themselves might not be able to control it, of course. And so there's this kind of paradox of, would kings create gods? Because the god might say, well, you shouldn't be king, right? So, they might not even want to push it to the limit of creating AGI because it could potentially disrobe them.
I don't know. In my experience, they never let anything out unless they've got a way to control it. But that doesn't, that's only my experience so far.
I guess that goes with the internet also.
Right. I mean, they can always turn off the electricity, right?
That's true. Yeah. And so, trying to, I guess, segue into the Iran situation, because you talk about this potential COVID 2.0 crisis that would be needed to usher in this great reset of sorts. And interestingly, Donald Trump today was vague posting. He said something like, the most powerful reset in history. That was the tweet. Nobody knows what it's in reference to, but it was in all caps, the most powerful reset in history. What do you think he's referring to? And could you maybe elaborate on
He's
what you
referring
think
to the going direct reset.
the what?
So the central banks met in 2019 and reviewed a plan from the BlackRock Institute. And let me step back. In 2018, I wrote a big wrap up for Solari called The State of Our Currency. And in it, I describe sort of the management of the reserve currency and the fact that every 80 to 120 years, the central banks do a reset. Okay. And we knew we were coming into a reset. It was time to have another reset. So I thought it was going to happen after the presidential election. And then when COVID happened, I thought, okay, we're going to do it before the presidential election. Anyway, so in 2019, again, it was August 2019, the central bankers met in Jackson Hole, where they meet every summer, and reviewed this plan called the Going Direct Reset. And if you come to Solari, we have a major piece that John Titus wrote on the Going Direct Reset and interviews about it. But also there's a summary piece that's public that can explain it. So the central bankers are doing what they do every 80 or 120 years. They're doing a reset. But the reason this one is such a big one is because digital technology, instead of moving the reserve currency or flushing the reserve currency or changing the reserve currency, they're basically canceling currency and going to a financial transaction system. And that's what, whether it's a public CBDC or a private CBDC like the States is planning on doing with stablecoin and digital tokens, it's programmable money. And what we try to do at Solari is we're working with states to pass legislation that put up guardrails on programmable money so it can't be used to destroy your basic legal rights and human and constitutional freedoms.
And so, like, putting on our tinfoil hat for a second, because everyone loves to do that, we're seeing this attack on the global energy infrastructure across the world. I mean, it could very well just be completely unrelated, but we're seeing, oil refineries in Mexico blow up yesterday. It's happened in the United States. There was something that happened, I believe, it was not the Suez. I don't think was it the Suez or
It's the Panama Canal.
Panama Canal? There was that explosion.
Right.
We have obviously oil refineries going up every day in Russia, across the Middle East. Do you think there's something to that, or is it just
I think it's
coincidental?
COVID 2.0. I think they're destroying demand.
Destroying demand.
Yeah. Well, you destroy supply and you destroy. But so what was COVID? COVID was a major shutdown of the global economy, right? In a way that destroyed demand. So by shutting down the energy, you're in the process of dramatically reducing economic activity. This time, you're raising energy prices dramatically, cutting supply, and at some point that's going to induce a major recession or depression, and it's going to be very harsh. So some countries are going to be advantaged versus others. So the harshness is not going to be evenly applied, but it's going to be very harsh on the small guys. The small guys don't have the capital or the access they need to endure. So if you want to keep consolidating small business and small farms up into, large corporate ownership and create more billionaires, here's another chance to do it.
Right. Because that's what happened during COVID. All the little guys got basically choked out because they couldn't ride out the crisis. And so, what is your read on the Iran war? What is the central motivation behind it? Is it just controlling the waterways? Is it getting the oil? Is it the Iranians were not playing into this global scheme?
Right. So Wesley Clark, after 9/11, said we're going to attack 7 countries in 5 years. The 7th was Iran. That was the last one because it's the big one. There's a great scene. Did you ever see the movie Vice about Dick Cheney?
No.
There's a great scene where Cheney explains why they have to take Iran. And Powell's disgusted with him. They're in the Situation Room, and he says, "What's your exit plan?" And Cheney turns to him and he says, "There is none." Meaning, we got to take Iran. We got to occupy it. Now, I think the goal is essentially stop the leakage so that you can implement the digital control system, and the Western faction will be dominant in it. I mean, part of this is just who's going to be dominant, but I think the other thing is the way you get people to install your financial infrastructure is it's a condition precedent to getting energy. If you can cut off their energy, then they have to play ball.
So would you say it's more about Iran's trading in certain currencies that are outside the control of the U.S. fiscal hegemony, or is it more ado with the energy control, or is it maybe just both equally weighted as motivation?
I would say it's leakage from the central banker's model. So it's a combination of being outside the central banking system, but being able to stay outside because you have such a great source of, I mean, you have so many fossil fuel resources and great intellectual resources. I mean, you're talking about the Persians are the highest IQ. They and the Chinese have the highest IQs of anybody in the world. So whether they're intellectually independent or energy independent and not playing ball in the model, they're and it, you know, here's the funny thing to understand. It's there's a great Substack that on the Unbecoming Substack that just got published called the House Always Wins. So you've seen the Game of Thrones. Have you seen Game of Thrones?
I never got into it. I mean, I'm familiar with it.
So there's a there's a bank called the Iron Bank, and you constantly have different factions warring, but the bank is always on both sides, and so the bank always wins. So the war is real. You have two factions having a real war, but at the top, the bank's going to win. Whoever wins, right?
Okay, and who is that in this respect then? Like,
so I think in this respect, you've got the Anglo-American Alliance versus the BRIC coalition, and the question is, you know, who's going to be middle management of what?
right, because right now you have the Iranians saying that they want to either, there's mixed reports, but they want to trade in either their own currency, the yuan, or cryptocurrency. They're saying that they want to charge these tolls through a different currency.
Well, I think what they want is they don't want the Anglo-American Alliance telling them how to live their life. I mean,
Right.
Ultimately, this issue is about sovereignty.
Yeah.
But if you look at all these different countries, I can't talk about Iran, but certainly China and Russia are implementing the control grid internally themselves. They just want to be the boss of their own control grid.
I like the term you use, leakage, to describe this, because while it is only a very small portion of the global, currency exchange, or the global or foreign currency, it still is something that could potentially snowball. And,
Right.
If I'm in control, I'm very concerned about things like that because, as that old saying goes, it's just a handful of people that can change the world, right? And that's where it starts.
I'll tell you the great example. When I was litigating with the Department of Justice, I spent a lot of time trying to understand narcotics trafficking, including by the intelligence agencies and sort of officially sanctioned by the U.S. government. And there was a story about a narcotics trafficking operation at Mena, Arkansas, when Clinton was the governor, and it was a joint project between Bush at the National Security Council and Clinton as the governor in Arkansas. And one of the things that happened, there was a woman named Linda Ives whose son was killed because he and his friend accidentally bumped onto a narcotics deal and ended up getting killed. And here you have this lovely Southern housewife who's just trying to figure out what happened to her son. And the next thing you know, she's got black helicopters coming down on her head. And she can't fathom why all this money and power cares about her not being able to figure out what happened to her son.
Right.
And so, and then she got, I think it was a former AG, started to help her as her attorney, and they were trying to illuminate the narcotics trafficking and corruption and money laundering going on in Arkansas. and they kept peeling the layers back, and it kept getting more and more dangerous. And they're like, why is this kid's death a major national security issue? Anyway, so I was studying this and other stories like this, and what I realized is, you can't let 20 soccer moms back narcotics trafficking out of one of 3,100 counties in America, because if one county can do it, then another county can do it, and then another county can do it, and then another county can do it. And as they do it, it's going to be great for local business. It's going to be great for local real estate. The local guys are going to start to have nicer lives. They're going to start to make more money. And then the next thing you know, you've destroyed your model, right? So what I discovered was that the most powerful wars are channel wars. They want to keep making sure that things go through our channel. So let's go back to COVID. You have all the small businesses shut down, but the publicly traded businesses are allowed to stay open. And literally, you had Andrew Sorkin on TV saying, that's science. It's science that in a shopping mall, you shut down all the small businesses and the big box store stays open and the parking lot is packed for people going to the big box store. And that's science, because the virus won't get you in the big box publicly traded store. Okay, so what are they doing? They're shutting down the small business, and that way they can move all the market share into a business that's in their channel. Okay? And the Fed injects $5 trillion, which makes capital available to businesses in their channel to go buy the assets that these guys now have to sell, because I got to sell my real estate because I've lost my income. I got to feed my kids, right?
Yeah.
So whether I'm moving assets to my channel or I'm moving market share and income to my channel, it's all about channel wars. I'm shutting down your channel and I'm causing all of your income and assets to move to my channel. And it's a channel war. And
yes, and that could potentially spread rather quickly. And so, how do you think that conflict is going to end? I mean, obviously, you were in the Bush administration, and you kind of seen how things worked with the Iraq War. How do you think this war ends? Do you have high hopes for these peace talks, or do you think that it's going to fall apart and it ultimately ends with boots on the ground?
so I don't think it's going to end until one side is severely decimated, or you have to.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're the Persians, are you going to end a 6,000-year-old civilization? In this situation? No, I think you're going to fight to the death.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you allow yourself to be a digital slave? Would you?
Well, and they've already invested so much. They wouldn't get this far only to throw in the towel now, it seems.
There are a couple of issues, so I'll get back to that. But here's the thing. If you're committed to this architecture and you can't afford Iran's leakage, are you going to give up? No. Mm-hmm. There's no... I don't see, if you look at the positions of both sides, I don't see where there's a compromise that's possible. Now, it's interesting because it's interesting that Vance is leading the effort, because I think one of the reasons the Iranians refused to negotiate with Witkoff and Kushner, I suspect, and this is conjecture, I'm just guessing, is that one of the reasons that Witkoff and Kushner are being used to negotiate is they're outside. Witkoff at times has been a government special employee, but Kushner's completely outside of the disclosure, and that way they can negotiate on behalf of the Trump family interests for essentially kickbacks and grift.
Yeah.
And I think the reasons the Iranians want advance is to shut that off. But sure enough, Witkoff and Kushner are going. So one of the sticking points here is going to be the graft. Now, when Trump came in, if you look at what the Iranians are asking for, it's much worse from Trump's point of view than what Trump had when he tore up the last agreement. In other words, he tore up the last agreement because he said it wasn't good enough. Now he's his negotiating possibilities are all much worse than what he tore up.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, one of the rumors about the last deal was when he tore it up, all the Iranians were demanding their kickbacks, the private kickbacks that went to various government leaders back. And that's why Kerry kept running over to try and negotiate, because nobody wanted to give their kickbacks back.
The first mistake that probably 50% of people make when they get into prepping is they run out and they find the cheapest, biggest bucket of so-called emergency food that money can buy. The problem is it usually tastes awful. And I know what you're thinking, Nate, in a disaster situation, I'm gonna rise to the occasion. My palate is formidable. No, it's not. You're not built like that. You're a first worlder just like me. There's a much better solution that your family's gonna love you for. Let's check it out. Would you like some chocolate cake that will last 25 years? How about some vegetables, or some shredded beef, or hundreds of other varieties? Go through the link in the description below and get 15% off the #1 freeze-dried food company in America, the only one that I 100% resolutely endorse, Wholesale Freeze-Dried Foods. Use the coupon code in the description for 15% off. A lot of my viewers are interested in hearing your thoughts, and I know this has been somewhat taken out of context and sensationalized with the continuity of government and the bunker stuff, and I hope you can kind of demystify that, because your theory is that there's been this money that's been sequestered from various programs. It's been channeled into this underground network of bunker systems.
What I said on Tucker Carlson, so we were talking about the 21 trillion that's missing from the U.S. government.
Okay.
From government accounts between 1998 and 2015. There's 21 trillion of undocumentable adjustments. Government is in massive violation of the financial management laws. On the bailouts, there was 29 trillion that was lent or given. That's 50 trillion total. And then going direct, there was 5 trillion. That's 55 trillion. And that's before we get to quantitative easing. So needless to say, there is massive amounts of money missing from the federal government. And I would be happy to talk about sort of the 10 likeliest places that money went. But it's many different places, because $55 trillion is a lot of money and it goes to a lot of places. Okay, so now I was speaking about the 21 trillion missing from the government accounts, and a researcher who I know said, look, the most of it was spent on the underground bases. And I said, no, I don't believe that. You know, if you look at where it was likely to go, where money's showing up and turning up, I don't think it's all going to the underground basis. But I made a decision with, there's a brilliant researcher in our network, and he and I decided we would do a systematic look at the underground bases and see if we could calculate or estimate how much was spent on underground bases, just as a mental exercise.
Yeah.
And we concluded that a majority of the money had not gone to finance underground bases. So, you know, you see all over the internet headlines that I said 21 trillion went to underground bases. I said the opposite. I said, no, I concluded that it didn't. Okay.
Well, even if it was a fraction of that, I mean, you know,
so here's what I can. So here's what we concluded. First of all, there are plenty of underground bases that are public knowledge. The government discloses that they build underground bases because for continuity of government, they need underground bases. That's the intelligent thing to do. If you're the government, you're supposed to be prepared for the worst case, right? So you're supposed to have underground bases. They have underground bases. That's all disclosed. Nothing wrong with that. So we took all the ones that have been publicly disclosed, and then we tried to collect up all allegations, whether it's from whistleblowers or, you know, truckers who are driving trucks down into underground bases. You know, there's a lot of deliveries that go into these facilities. Anyway, so we collected up all the allegations we could find all around the world, as well as the work of all the researchers like Richard Sauter and Richard Dolan on underground bases, I have a great interview at Solari on Richard Dolan, who basically reviewed all of Richard Sauter's work and sort of republished it. Anyway, and that's an excellent thing that will really help you understand the phenomena. Anyway, I've traveled extensively by car in the United States, so I know the United States very well geographically. So we went state by state for 2 years, a couple hours a week, looking at all the allegations, all the geography, where the military bases, everything else.
Wow.
And we made a wild, I used to call it on Wall Street, it's a wild ass guess. We made a wild guess that probably there were at least 170 underground bases or facilities in the United States. Now, and I think obviously whatever number there are, they're expensive, but I don't begin to think they represent a major portion of the 21 trillion. Now, the question is what's going on in them and how much does whatever the operations in those bases and the related underground transportation systems, how much, does that cost? Because one of the things I learned working on that project, which should be intuitively obvious, is building an underground base costs one thing. Building it and keeping it and maintaining it secretly costs many multiples. Secrecy is very expensive to engineer.
Yeah, because this would involve thousands of people to have ironclad NDAs that
Right.
they don't disclose any information, which seems that there would be thousands of people living double lives out there.
Oh, I don't think it's thousands. I think if you look at all the black budget and secret projects, it's millions. And it's very interesting. We have a wonderful interview on the Solari report that we did with a retired Department of Justice attorney about secrecy and how it's engineered. And it's very helpful to understand.
What is that called?
It's called The Many Faces of Secrecy with Amy Benjamin. And I recorded it in 2018 as I was finishing up the state of our currencies. And it's it really, I'll tell you how I found out about this. I was interviewing with Lawrence Wilkerson, who was had been Powell's chief of staff, and and does a lot of commentary. And Wilkerson called me and he said he was at I think George Mason University, was teaching national security, whatever his university. He said, I just read a peer-reviewed paper on how secrecy is engineered. It's one of the best things I've ever read. I can't tell you about it now until it gets published, but as soon as it's published, I'll let you know. But as soon as it's published, you have to do an interview with the author, because this is an amazing piece and it'll really help your subscribers understand. And he was Powell's chief of staff, or worked for Powell over at the Joint Chiefs, and state. So Wilkerson really understands a lot about how secrecy happens. And anyway, but Amy's piece that she published on, it's a peer-reviewed study of how secrecy is engineered, and it's very, very good.
Yeah, and to muse about like the government building these subterranean complexes is not necessarily. A lot of people are making claims that, well, this means that there's a apocalypse event that they know about that they're preparing for, and that may be the case, but it might just be prudent contingency planning also, in that they know that there could potentially be a big war someday or something, and this is why a lot of people will of course take issue with the fact that they're not invited to that party. Understandably so. There's no
I wouldn't take issue, because you don't necessarily want to be underground with them.
there's a lot of that's true. Yeah,
I'll bet you dimes to donuts that you would take your chances in the woods instead.
yeah, in the wasteland. Yeah. So are you at all, though, like concerned for your own, like in an exploration of something like that, were you ever concerned for your own safety? Like that you're maybe poking around,
during the litigation, I was poisoned 8 times. I had my house broken into. I was run off, people tried to run me off the road. I had all sorts of, I had serious physical harassment. I had a bicycle accident, which I think was engineered by directed energy. We had electronic weaponry used on us. I mean, I could go on and on. We have a series, it's Larry, called Deep State Tactics 101, where I describe all the tactics over 11 years that we had to deal with. So, and there were many times I was sure I was dead. I thought I'm dead in 5 seconds or 5 minutes. I finally am not going to make it out of this one. And what I discovered was, there's only one thing. It's interesting. If you look at risk management in this environment, what I will tell you is you should focus your efforts and your time on attracting spiritual protection. There's not enough money and resources and time in the world to protect yourself against the bad guys. What you need to do is get in good with the good guys. Does that make sense?
I think a lot of people assume that, people who work in and around Washington have like insider information or that they're privy to like classified information. But the way you're talking here is that there's this whole
it's very compartmentalized.
Running things.
It's very compartmentalized.
Right.
So I've gone back in. There's a real effort to keep me out of boardrooms. But when I get in a boardroom and I can teach people, because everybody knows their little lane, they don't integrate. They don't see the big picture.
And, people will hear that and they'll say, well, directed energy weapons. I mean, it sounds fantastical, but they just did take out Maduro's security team with the discombobulator machines. It's not beyond the realm of possibility that something like that happened. I guess the question would be, well, were they just trying to scare you, or were they actually trying to take you off the road?
I'll make a guess. I think the directed energy weapons was simply, what they want is they want you to look like you've lost. They want you to fail. Okay, so they tried to falsify evidence that basically, if they had succeeded, would have put me in jail. Mm-hmm. But when that didn't happen, I think, between the poisoning and the various physical harassment, the goal was to cause me to go mad, commit suicide, or just be ineffective and fail.
And even when you come on and disclose these things, to the average person, they're kind of like, oh, yeah, sure, right? Like they're not going to take it seriously.
Actually, when I talk about it, they take it seriously. When I first started to talk about this weaponry, I pulled out a memorandum of understanding between the Department of Defense and the Department of Justice, proposing the Department of Justice use non-lethal weapons developed by DoD and their contractors for domestic application. So I didn't talk publicly. Whenever I talk publicly, I use serious documentation, unless I'm engaging in conjecture, and then I tell you it's conjecture. But, I'm an investment banker. So lawyers have hard evidence that they use, to produce results in a court of law. Investment bankers have to trade with 1% and 2% knowledge. So I like to help people understand what's going on where there's still time to do something about it. And I do everything I can to pull in that kind of documentation. But I'm not trying to reach everybody. I'm trying to reach the people who will take action to make sure their family is successful in this environment as it really is. So one of my favorite quotes from Steve Bartlett, he says, you want to face an uncomfortable truth to avoid an uncomfortable future. If you don't face an uncomfortable truth, you're buying into an uncomfortable future. So it's really important to me that you have the knowledge you need to take action while there's still, time for you to do something about it. And I've looked at your channel. That's exactly what you're doing. Now, you've got a different focus than I have, but it's the same thing. We want people to take action, and make themselves more resilient so that they don't get run over by this.
And so in your research, which sounds very extensive, I have to ask, of these 170 locations, I'm not sure what you can disclose, but was there any that really stood out as being quite significant?
No, I was always intrigued by Dolan's explanations of the ones where the submarine could literally go through a tunnel and come up in a lake, or, the docking base for the submarine was underground, under the land. So the the undersea tunnels and their entrances.
Interesting. So you think that there's connections between the ocean and inland?
I don't know, but presumably, given what Dolan described as the potential for underground, I could see a submarine coming in underground and then connecting to an underground transportation system so that literally you could get out of the submarine and go someplace, on land, so to speak, without anybody knowing.
Yeah, because I mean, a lot of people, when they hear this, that's a cause for alarm that while they're doing all these things in secret, they must anticipate that something is going to happen. They must have some tangible understanding of what might be the reason to justify such an extensive network.
You can have underground facilities to deal with different kinds of geophysical catastrophes. That's one reason. But another reason you could do it is because you want to stage operations and keep them secret. Right? Mm-hmm. So that's another reason. There are multiple reasons why you might want to have underground bases. So, Switzerland has implemented an entire underground transportation system to move their mail around because they don't want the satellites being able to map out and surveil everything they're doing through the postal system.
In terms of self-reliance, and I know that's something that before we started here, you said was important for you. What can people do in order to insulate themselves from this control grid that is emerging, aside just going out and living in the country and disconnecting from the internet?
Right. So I'm not, I'm the last person to disconnect from the internet.
Right.
So as I said, we've got a PDF at Solari called Coming Clean, and it's an article we've been writing and rewriting since 2004. And we just did another iteration and published it in hard copy as well. So, but you can get the PDF and download it for free or print it out. And basically, it's basically saying, the system is like a tapeworm. And the way a tapeworm works in your body, it injects a chemical into you that makes you crave what's good for the tapeworm. And it's made you weaker and weaker, and you need to detox. And so here are all the things that you can do to get the tapeworm and its injections out of your mind, out of your life, out of your home, out of your pocketbook, out of your family, out of everything. Just clean it out in a way that makes you stronger and more powerful. And as you become more powerful, you deny food to the tapeworm. The tapeworm, the parasite, gets weaker. So what we're saying is cut off the energy you're giving to the parasite and do it in a way that makes you stronger. And as you do that, it helps all the people around you do the same. And if enough people will do it, if those kinds of changes can go virally, starting with use cash, it can make an enormous difference. Because what I'm saying is leave their channel. Leave their channel. Go move your time, your energy, your money into channels that are run by people who really care about you instead of who are poisoning and killing you. Stop supporting your enemy. So, and everybody looks at it and thinks, well, those are just lifestyle choices. No, they're not. Our support of their channels is what's giving them power. We have the power to stop building the control grid by not going to work and building it, by not financing it and investing in their stocks and bonds, on and on and on. We have the power to say no, just walk out.
Seems, though, that becomes increasingly more difficult as access to any part of society requires compliance on some level. Like you need a phone now to, go to a restaurant because that's where the menu is, or, it's just thousands of examples like that where unless you...
So this is not 0 or 1. In other words, I'm not saying divorce yourself from society and go off and live in the woods and eat beans. What I'm saying is, use cash whenever possible. Be discerning about using digital technology that could come with neurowarfare. So I'll give you an example that men always cringe when I talk about. I think one of the major delivery mechanisms for neurowarfare is porn. And if you look at the statistics, 90% or more of men in America and 60% of women, I think, use porn. Guess what the average age is when kids start using porn?
I presume it's younger than it used to be.
11.
Yeah.
11. And you're talking about something that's delivering, entrainment technology and subliminal programming designed to get you addicted. Okay. And God knows what kinds of programming you're ingesting in the middle of that. Right. So you have if you study addiction and you look at all the efforts to get kids addicted to something, whether it's liquor or drugs or sugar, video games or porn or, gambling or whatever. I mean, these are weapons of war. These are not just lifestyle choices. These are weapons of war. We have the ability to see the game, withdraw from hurting ourselves in the game, and then changing the game.
Well, I'm not very optimistic. I'm pretty black pill when it comes to that stuff because there ain't many people using cash. And even me who knows all this stuff, it's just inconvenient to use cash, right? Like you got to, count out the change and you got to hand over you got to carry it around and it's a liability. And so everything in the system is encouraging you to the contrary. And it just seems inevitable that we're moving towards that. And there's just going to be a few holdouts in the end, maybe like me and a few other people living in the woods or off grid, who are going to be outside of that system's clutches.
So I understand why you feel the way you feel, but I've gone back through history, and tyranny always looks hopeless. And then something happens and freedom wins. And it always looks hopeless. And it always comes down to like a tiny number of people who just say no and insist on freedom. So I think that's going to happen again. And I don't think it's because we're going to defeat the control grid. I think the control grid is going to defeat itself because it's so out of alignment with the fundamental nature of life and how the universe works energetically and spiritually. I just think it's going to, all these guys, the people who rise at the top are psychopathic, and they are, they have embraced the demonic for the most part, and they're going to kill each other.
Yeah.
They don't have a culture that can achieve the transition that they're hoping to achieve.
It's like the Ouroboros, the snake eating its own tail, and eventually they will devour themselves. That's a very optimistic way to end this interview, I think. Catherine, I want to thank you for coming out. And where can people find more information about you and what you do? I know you have a YouTube channel. Is it Solari Report?
Yeah, we have a website, Solari.com. Be careful. We are inundated with imposters. So right. I don't know if you have an imposter problem, but we have a major one, and we're working.
I'm sure I got all kinds of deep fake AIs out there.
Yeah. So anyway, Solari.com. I would start there, and you can identify all our social media through our website.
Well, thanks again for coming out, and we look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you. You have a wonderful day.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.